That was the picture I was looking for. All right. So I've been intrigued by the pause ever since I first came to St. Patrick's for Vespers on St. Patrick's Day. And the pause, or sujara in Gregorian chant, has its origin in the Hebrew poetry of the Psalms. And unlike the poetry with which we are most familiar, the Hebrew poetry of the Psalms does not rhyme and it lacks meter. Instead, it uses a variety of literary mechanisms such as parallelisms and chiastic structures. And this will, for example, there will be an opening thought that is then echoed by a parallel one, like the heavens are telling the glory of God and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. And sometimes parallelisms can occur for an entire psalm where an opening thought is echoed by an ending one. For example, Psalm 103 both begins and ends with "Bless the Lord, O my soul." But this is an example of parallelism occurring within a specific passage, where there's an opening thought that's echoed by a parallel one. Here's another example from Psalm 42. "The Lord will command his loving kindness in the morning, and at night his song shall be with me, a prayer to the God of my life." And between each line, there's a natural place to pause. And that's where it's marked by the asterisk, like this, and where we pause in the daily office. And the pause takes about 2 seconds or a little more. Some medieval treatises say that the pause should take as long as it takes to whisper Ave Maria. And the pause helps the chanter not to go too fast, while also underscoring the contemplative nature of the poetry. But beyond whatever pragmatic value it serves, the pause helps to reinforce the sense of stillness that is a fullness rather than simply an absence. The pause helps to underscore the content of the psalm, not so that so it allows the mind to grasp the import of the opening cadence before moving on to the next one. But this doesn't involve thinking or analyzing the words, but just letting the meaning wash over you. And I've been thinking about how this can help us slow down and go at a more humane pace in our life, and to embrace the silences and slow periods that are often uncomfortable. And because worship is formative in the cadences of our mind, that forms us in what we find normative. And through worship, God's beauty and stillness gradually seeps into the nooks and crannies of our heart, forming our affections at the deepest level of our being. That's what we talked about in the classes on gratitude, how God is reforming and rightly ordering our affections. And one of the ways this happens is through worship. Because when we allow our lives to be transformed by Christian worship, including inhabiting the church's rhythms and cycles while organizing our lives around the liturgical calendar, then over time, our dispositions can become rightly ordered. And accordingly, worship is more than merely something we do to recharge our faith or to remind us what we truly believe, though of course that is part of it. but worship is also an invitation to a different kind of life. And the pauses in Gregorian chant, the sajaras, offer just such an invitation. They offer an opportunity for our affections to be reordered under the gentle tutelage of transcendent worship. And they invite us to retreat from the tyranny of the urgent and to push back against the dictatorship of noise. The pause ushers us into a mysterious world that runs counter to the logic of consumerism and industrialism. These pauses push back against the pragmatism and efficiency of the modern economic system. So according to the worldly wisdom of modern cost-benefit economics, one might think these pauses are inefficient, because just imagine how much more prayer we could get done if they were truncated. Yet these pauses disrupt worldly wisdom by suggesting a different way of being human and a different way of ordering our priorities. And in particular, they invite us into a more humane and slower type of life. And I want to share a couple artworks that help to reinforce the ethics of the pause and slowness. And one of these is this painting that the French painter Millet painted sometime between 1857 and 1859. It's called The Angelus. It shows a man and a woman ending their workday in the fields to pray the Angelus. And in the fading daylight, we can see, just in the back, we can see the spirals of a church. The bells of that church would have called them to prayer. And one can see the signs of their work around them, the basket of potatoes recently harvested, the tools, and so forth. And yet this painting is not about work, but about cessation. As we leave our busyness to embrace what Jesus called the one thing needful. In Luke 10. This was inspired by Millet's recollections of his grandmother's praying the Angelus. And it gives one a sense that prayer is not so much a pause from work, but that work is a pause from the real action of life, namely prayerful leisure. And the couple in the painting have laid down the tools of their trade, but they are doing more than merely praying. They are participating in the rest that is to come, balancing the active life with the contemplative. And one of the reasons that I think this painting resonates with us so much is that we all intuitively identify with the power of the pause. No matter how much our lives have been colonized by hassle, it's a natural human tendency to linger over the things that we love. But we have to be proactive at this, because living under the dictatorship of noise, we have to be intentional and deliberate in carving out times of silence, times of stillness, times to pause. And the pauses in worship help us to do that. The rhythms of prayer offer an invitation into a slower and more humane type of life. Another artwork a very different type of artwork, that does this in a different way is by Rodin, the French the French artist Rodin, he carved these beautiful hands. His dates are 1840 to 1917. I don't know when this was done because he did a number of variations on this. This is called the Cathedral or the Ark of the Covenant, and he later recast it in bronze. This shows two intertwined right hands gently touching each other, and the delicate space between the hands is like a sanctuary that conveys a sense of peace. And this stone sculpture creates a mysterious inner space between the hands in a way that's similar to the pauses in conversation or in prayer, because the empty space, like the pauses in prayer, are just as important as the actual content. And we'll talk about that's also true with pauses in dialogue, which we'll talk about shortly. But so a sculptor is the artist, sculpture is the work of art. You have to forgive me, my brain is a bit slow today because I have a bit of a headache from the cold that I'm recovering from. But that's helping me to go slow, which is appropriate. A sculpture, by definition, is not in motion. It's a stationary form of art. But some sculptures convey a sense of energy and movement. But this work conveys two people being slow together. You don't get the sense that they're in motion to hold hands or to do something productive, but they're just lingering with each other's gentle touch. And Rodin was a master of using empty space, and he was fascinated with the partial figure and understatement. So there's a lot that he's not showing us here. We don't know who are these people, what's the story behind it, what do the rest of their bodies look like. All of that is left out because he understood that what he does not show us becomes as important as what he allows us to see, even as silence can convey more than words. A sculpture like this does many things for us, in us and to us, and yet its value lies in its non-utilitarian character. I don't need the cathedral to do anything for me to be valuable, just as God didn't need to do anything when he rested on the seventh day. Instead, this work invites us to just be present with it, to contemplate, to be leisurely in the presence of great beauty. Like all good art, this is a work of grace that liberates us from the fixation with instrumentality and technique that has become the hallmarks of the economy of purpose. Within the economy of purpose, we want to fill up empty space, just like we want to fill up the silences within life. But sometimes we need an artwork like this to remind us that life's most precious moments are when we linger in stillness. Just like these hands are just lingering at the sense of stillness. One of my favorite contemporary philosophers, the Korean-born German Catholic philosopher Byung-Chul Han, he writes, "Stillness emanates from what is unavailable. What is not available stabilizes and deepens our attention. It brings forth a contemplative gaze. The gaze has the patience needed to see the long-lasting and slow. When everything is available and accessible, attention remains shallow. The gaze does not linger. Like that of a hunter, it wanders. For Nicholas Malebranche, attentiveness is the natural prayer of the soul. Today, the soul no longer prays. It produces itself. That's the economy of purpose, where everything has to have a function and a utilitarian purpose. It produces itself. Extensive communication distracts the soul. Only those activities that resemble prayer go together with stillness. Contemplation, however, is opposed to production. The compulsion of production and communication destroys contemplative immersion. Only when friendship is moved out of the realm of production and into the realm of contemplative immersion can true communication and mutual listening occur. Because then communication and listening occurs not against the backdrop of noise, but against the backdrop of stillness. But most communication today does not exist against a backdrop of stillness. And the result is shallow friendships and superficial dialogue. Yet listening in silence and being able to listen to silence with those we love is key to flourishing friendships. Because a true friend is somebody that you can be silent with, someone you trust enough to simply be still in his or her presence. But this is incredibly difficult for Americans. Researchers have found a 4-second pause. Just 4-second pause in conversation is enough to cause Americans to start feeling anxious and insecure. By contrast, Japanese are comfortable pausing up. I don't know how they found this out, but they did. 8.2 seconds. A Japanese person is comfortable pausing 8.2 seconds in conversation. It's only after 8.2 seconds that the Japanese person, on average, starts to feel insecure and awkward. I'm going to have to do some experiments on you, find out if there's any difference in Western Rite Christians or Byzantine. I'll be like, oh, Jim has an awkward look on his face after 3 seconds. Pause. Yeah. I don't know how they found that out, if it was a large enough sample size or what. I'd be curious if there's a difference in, it's probably different in the cities. But anyway, being able to have pauses in conversation is important, but it's becoming increasingly more difficult. So, texting etiquette now, there's this unspoken expectation that if somebody's important to you, you're going to reply. What used to be that you'd be expected to reply the same day. Now, if many people, if they don't get a reply to a text message within an hour, it sends them on a roller coaster ride of anxiety. And, I have a picture of it. So shrinking, the interval of pause in digitally mediated conversation is shrinking as people increasingly expect instant replies. And whereas the ancient tradition of letter writing had a leisured quality that could allow weeks, months, sometimes even longer between replies, our new digitally mediated habits of conversation bring with it an urgency and problematizing of pause. And this creates a sense of freneticism that undermines the tranquility so essential for meaningful communication and deeper friendships. And our discomfort with pauses has its root in primal survival mechanisms, including uncertainty avoidance. Dr. Michelle DeMarco published a fascinating study in a fascinating article rather, in Psychology Today. And she talks in the article about uncertainty avoidance and why we find pauses to be difficult. Here, what she says: in the quiet space between spoken words lurks uncertainty. Human beings generally don't embrace uncertainty well. What we don't know, we can't control, and what we can't control casts us into an unsafe and insecure limbo with anticipation about what might be said or how others will respond, fueling anxiety. Human beings generally don't embrace uncertainty well. What we don't know, we can't control. I think I just read that. There's a repeat here. So she goes on to say, it's not on the screen, but, oh yes, it is. My notes are wrong. Even when we're by ourselves, silence can be ominous. We can't escape our automatic thoughts, particularly the ones that spotlight fears and insecurities. This can cause rumination. Unstructured moments of silence can also make us aware of aspects of ourselves and of life that the structure of noise drowns out. Silence can wake us up to truths that we may not want to acknowledge. There's also some discussion about this in Metropolitan Anthony Bloom's book. We're going to skip over this because I want to leave time for questions, but we'll come back to that quote later if there's time. But I did want to share the neurochemical component to our discomfort with silence. Dr. Anna Lembke, an addiction specialist at Stanford, she, in her book, fascinating book, she describes the various treatments she gives to people suffering from addiction. And one of the addictions that she treats is digital addiction. And this reflects a growing awareness among addiction researchers that our digital addictions can activate the same circuitry as drugs and other behavioral addictions because of how it hijacks our dopamine system. And she tells, the interesting point is that for those suffering in the grip of this addiction, stillness can be terrifying. Because it's hard to just be in the present moment, we end up in addictive behaviors that distract us from the present and from ourselves and from God. And Dr. Lemke illustrates this with an anecdote from one of her patients. My patient, Sophie, a Stanford undergraduate from South Korea, came in seeking help for depression and anxiety. Among the many things we talked about, she told me she spends most of her waking hours plugged into some kind of device, Instagramming, YouTubing, listening to podcasts and playlists. In session with her, I suggested she try walking to class without listening to anything and just letting her own thoughts bubble to the surface. She looked at me both incredulous and afraid. Why would I do that? She asked, open-mouthed. A week later, Sophie returned and reported on the new experience. It was hard at first, but then I got used to it and even kind of liked it. I started noticing the trees. I like this because it shows how stillness can be healing, and stillness can help us to have awareness of the world around us, the world of the senses. This is important for me because I live in my head so much. I find it very healing to get out in nature and just notice the world of the senses and the trees. I can be detached from my senses. I'll tell you a little story that illustrates this. I had a friend who was, as a hobby, he set himself up as a nutritionist to give unofficial advice to his friends. And he told me that he had been studying Aristotle and realized that if I ate 3,000 calories a day, that eventually I would gain weight initially, but then it would stimulate my metabolism so much that then it would reverse and I would lose weight. And so I was like, he convinced me from Aristotle and everything, and so I started, I got really, he was like really into like bars, and I was under so much stress, I had to like eat so much, I was just like eating all the time, like where am I going to get my next meal? And I got huge, I just got, like, I exceeded 200 pounds, like my belly was out to here, my cheeks were all puffy, and people around me were like, Robbie, it's not working. I'm like, but like, and he, so like, that sounds weird, but sometimes I can get out of touch with my senses, and I was just like living in my head with this theory that this was going to work. So then I finally, I fired him. I stopped having phone calls with him, and then I got back to regular. I'm not thin, but I'm regular now. Why did I say that? Oh yeah, the trees. So I really find it healing to get in touch with the sensory world. So I like to walk barefoot in the forest and just grounded and look at the trees and so forth. But that's very hard. I had to train myself to slow down and to be quiet. Given the factory mindset of contemporary pragmatism, it's easy to feel like we're wasting time whenever we're not keeping busy and multitasking. Why simply walk to class when you could be walking and consuming information? Why simply drive to work when you could be both driving and listening to the news or an audiobook? Why pause during Gregorian chant when it adds an extra 5 minutes to the services? Yet sometimes less is more, and sometimes we need to get less done in order to live richer and more meaningful lives. In other words, sometimes we need to pause. And pausing and being still is a way to be tethered to the present, which is the only place where we can truly meet God. The devil knows that if he can keep us from being connected to the present moment, he can keep us from connecting with God. And one of the ways he does that is through keeping us constantly on the move and under the constant tyranny of noise. Let's see, what time is it here? Well, we're doing fine with time. So I'm going to just pause there for some questions. There we go. Or comments or observations. Does anybody have anything that comes to mind? Want to share or ask?
What you were saying about this just reminded me a lot about sleep. That a lot of people have sleep problems because when they can't fall asleep, they get upset they can't control their sleep. Sleep's one of these key areas where the more we try to control it, the less good actual ability we have to do it, the worse it is. And that's involved with both. What made me think about that was when you said that the pause is kind of, we're not in control, we don't trust. That sleep is an act of trusting God, right? That pausing is an act of trusting God, that being able to do anxiety means you have to give it to God, right? All these things that we have, when we try to run them ourselves, all of them don't work very well. But some are more obvious than others. If we don't have God in the picture, then things go off the rails. So that pausing that you're talking about invites us to remember that even the work we're doing is supposed to have God in it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I agree about the sleep thing. When you try to over-control your sleep and, oh my goodness, I'm not sleeping, then it actually makes the problem worse. C.S. Lewis said that sleep is a jade that, what is sleep is a jade that woos its scorners and scorns its wooers. Any more thoughts about that? It's the tendency to want to control everything, whether sleep or conversation or anything in our life, is one of the reasons we're uncomfortable with pause and with quiet and with silence, because it indicates uncertainty. And humans don't do very well with uncertainty. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I've come to the conclusion over the years that efficiency is the enemy. Like most of what we're dealing with, society's need to make us more efficient. And when this came up a few years ago, I was thinking of what the least efficient thing that I could think of to do, and that's prayer. Like literally prayer is the more efficient you make it, the more useless it becomes in a sense, right? So the more time we spend, the more we try to be in his presence and not try to finish it, the better off we all are. It's like an anti-efficient exercise. It's an anti-efficiency machine. That's what prayer is. And so I've come to the conclusion that efficiency might just be the end. In a lot of contexts, not in all contexts, but large chunk of our life, efficiency is
Yeah, that's. I like the idea about prayer being an anti-efficiency machine. Like when we approach prayer when I approach prayer with an efficiency mindset, I'm like, okay, I'm going to like ask God for all the things that I need and for all my loved ones. And it's interesting that when you actually read the prayers that the church and the Psalms have given us, over half of it is not even asking God for things specifically. It's like praising Him or just enjoying being in His presence. And so that pushes back against efficiency. If I was just left to myself to make up my own prayers, it would be okay, I want this, and that. I mean, they're good things, usually like directed towards the needs of other people. But it's like prayer is to like get things done. But that's how, if I was making up my own prayers, I would approach it like that. But being using the prayers of the church kind of draws me away from that efficiency mindset. And then especially the pauses, when I try to observe the pauses in my own prayer time. And if I start rushing, if I start like, okay, I'm going to just get this done so I can feel good about myself, or I can, whatever, the pauses draw me away from that efficiency mindset. Yes?
I was just going to say, is government employee that efficiencies doing?
What? I didn't hear you.
Oh, I said as a government employee, I agree that efficiency is doing.
Yeah, well, so the scientific management movement in the late 19th century, and with people like Frederick Taylor, went into factories to try to make them more efficient. And then what we found in the early 20th century, and then throughout, actually through the mid-20th century, is that people then began to apply these techniques which work well in the factory to human beings themselves. So the scientific management techniques that worked within factories began to migrate over into our understanding of human beings. And anybody that's interested in studying that, I can recommend some books. But our our approach to economics and politics, and especially in the social sciences, is now has been completely capitulated to thinking about humans as machines within the efficiency mindset of the factory. Anyone else?
Well, you're recounting the weight thing kind of just triggered a memory in me a couple years ago when I went down to 98 pounds. And it's because I was holding my breath too much.
Oh no.
And my teacher was telling me, less is more. You can't go at it like this because it kills the appetite, basically. So it's an excellent way to lose weight, but not like I was doing it. I mean, but God, He has a way of taking what we do and working it for the good of our families, for us. Because it definitely got his attention. They thought I was nuts. They thought I was suicidal. But then, this past Thanksgiving, when I was growing up, everybody used to do arm wrestling. That was the fun thing that my family would do before the dinner was ready. And so my daughter, she challenged me to an arm wrestling match. And I was like, no, that's... So she convinced me to sit down and do it, and all I had to do was hold my arm down. She couldn't move me. And so then my son got excited, and he was like, hey, let me try. So he sat down and tried it. I didn't even have to try with him. It was shaking. He was pushing so hard he couldn't move me. And then my husband was hanging around just watching. And I hesitate to tell this part of the story because it's not very flattering. But I think it's a good thing to share because when your hemoglobin is 115% of normal because you hold your breath so much, and you go down to 98 pounds, what rebuilds is streamlined for endurance. That is what high altitude training does for athletes. That's why they go to the mountains and they train aerobically so they can get these stringy, wiry muscles that can endure like crazy. Well, he couldn't put my arm down. This happened just the other night. He finally took the challenge. And he's a big guy. He's very strong. And I could feel my whole body just, tensing as I was resisting and pushing my arm down. He couldn't do it. I mean, it took all my strength, but he couldn't do it.
Wow. But when you were 98 pounds, you were also you were also undefeated with arm wrestling as well, even then?
No, it had to build back.
Oh, when it built back. When it built back. Yeah, that's interesting. Yes?
Well, I have like so many comments. I love everything you're saying, Robin. Like, when you take the pictures, I thank you. This is such a great talk. We talk about this kind of stuff so often, and like with me, my background in sustainable food systems, like this speaks so much to me, especially. I know so many of y'all in the room would agree with this, but like you're saying, like economics and human efficiency, but when we look at like agriculture as one example, like in the name of efficiency, like the get bigger, get out mentality of agriculture, and now we have what we have now, and like in the name of efficiency, in the name of producing more and more and more and more food for an ever-growing population, and look at what it has done to God's creation. Like, look what we've done to our planet, not only to our planet, to ourselves. And so this all, like, I have so much I can say, but this speaks so much for me, specifically to that. In efficiency, we're so disconnected from God's creation in that march for efficiency, as well as our bodies, as well as our plates, as well as the act of growing food, of slow production of food, of slow and mindful eating. There's just so much. It's so rich. Like, I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear all the comments in your mind about that, because it definitely relates. Because when we think that when efficiency becomes the highest priority, then we get out of touch with God's ordering, and you start having things like monocultures and farmers that just just do one thing, and so the animals aren't working in synergy with each other, the farmers aren't working in synergy with the land, and then we see the results. How it's not only bad for the earth, but it's bad for us, bad for the animals, bad for our food. So yeah, feel free to share more about that. I'll just have one more little thought to share, and then we'll open up for the final questions. So the final thought. And this directly relates to the question about efficiency. So, okay, what's happened to my PowerPoint? What's happened to my PowerPoint here? Okay, here we go. Oh. Quote from a cool book. That's the cool book. So, in this book, I discuss how in order for the brain to develop properly, we need times of quiet, leisure, and even boredom. In order for the higher cognitive functions to work at optimal capacity, the brain needs lots of time during the day when we're at rest, when we're quiet, and when we can focus on specific mental, imaginative, or interpersonal tasks against the backdrop of stillness. Long stretches of unstructured time, especially spent outdoors, act as incubation periods for the higher cognitive functions, including memory and creativity. However, our modern lifestyle, including the factory-like model of the school system, undermines these vital opportunities for stillness and unstructured creativity. In his book, I'll wait to get to that. The little background of this thing I want to share is that David Smith wrote this book. He and his co-authors spent thousands of hours or hundreds of hours researching for this monograph called Digital Life Together, the Challenge of Technology for Christian Schools. They did a lot of qualitative analysis, going into classrooms and studying how schools were interacting with technology. And he found that digitally mediated education reinforced the task completion mentality that is a strong cultural value for Americans. It goes back to the idol of efficiency and so forth. But he shared one anecdote of a teacher who tried to push back against that. His class had been studying about Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. The class had been discussing how throughout the scriptures, God speaks to people in the wilderness, whereas today we have fortified ourselves against wilderness through continual noise, technology, and distractions. At one point in the lesson, the teacher sent the students outside of the classroom to find somewhere quiet to study the Sermon on the Mount. The students were expected to take notes using pencil and paper and not to bring any technology with them. We decided to attempt to create a little wilderness space in our busy day by seeking as much solitude and silence in the school as possible to allow the Word of God to come to us, the teacher said. And then Smith describes what happened next. After a reasonable time, the teacher calls the students back into the classroom and tells them, raise your hand if you didn't get to chapter 7. He then asks them to move into groups based on what chapters they finished reading. It becomes visible that almost 60% of the students did not get to the end of chapter 7. At this point, the teacher pauses and asks, "Wait, you didn't get to 7?" and then looks at them in silence for a full 10 seconds. The students all nod. A 10-second silence is an eternity after a teacher has asked a question in the North American classroom. For most teachers, a pause of 2 or 3 seconds requires training. It's not hard to surmise what students may be expecting him to say next. They have failed to complete an assignment. Finally, the teacher speaks again. "Okay, I'm proud of you because you are engaging with these chapters." In saying this, he frames the learning sequence in terms of the concerns he had voiced earlier, concerns that value slowness, wilderness, listening. He wanted to affirm that learning to slow down and engage the text is one of the skills I want you to be developing. So this story illustrates that listening to God involves slowing down and doing less, that more is not always better, and that sometimes we need to retreat into the silence of the wilderness to discover what God is trying to tell us. What the wilderness did for the students, namely providing an environment in which they felt safe slowing down and approaching the text in a spirit of contemplation, Gregorian chant does for us. The pauses in Vespers, Matins, and Lauds give us permission to lean into a slower and more contemplative frame of mind so that our hearts can be receptive to the music of the spheres. So we'll just take the final few minutes to hear any questions or comments that you may have.
I just have a thought on the subject of efficiency being bad. How many people here know about the old Route 66? Well, that was a small little road that went across half the country. And it got shut down basically to make room for a highway. And it technically still exists, but then it's a graveyard of ghost towns. And there's who knows how many people's lives were just completely uprooted or just wasted away because, well, we have to be more efficient.
Yeah, I see Route 66 in movies and so forth, and in songs. That's sad. But I want to say, so efficiency in itself is not necessarily bad. I use efficient systems all the time in my life and my routines, but when it helps to simplify my life. So I use workflow systems, project management systems, systems of efficiency to organize my work and what I do. But in order to simplify things, and in order to flourish. So again, it's when anyway. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Anybody? Any other thoughts? Yes.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. One, like you just saying that efficiency isn't necessarily bad, but especially in our society, like allowing God to reorder other things in our life, to reorder when it's appropriate to be efficient and when it's appropriate for us to be still. And the second thought is, in a way, taking those pauses makes you more efficient, ironically, right?
Makes you more what?
More efficient. Like, ironically speaking, when you make the appropriate pauses, and you do your prayers and you pray them well, and you take the appropriate pauses throughout your day and life to be present, you are actually more efficient in the tasks and everything else that you do in your life because it's well ordered.
That's right. And the irony now is that the corporations that are trying to be ultra efficient like Google and Meta and Facebook, now they've realized that, oh, in order to have people more efficient, we need to have them do mindfulness and yoga and all the whatever. So there was a mindfulness guru at Google who wrote this book saying, okay, you can be more efficient. He was an engineer, and he realized you can be more efficient if you practice mindfulness. So then he wrote a book about that called Search Inside Yourself. But yeah, I think when being efficient, the problem is when efficiency becomes an end in itself and becomes our goal. You know, if I'm pausing in prayer or if I'm taking time to be still, but just because I want to be more efficient, that's going to be a problem. So, just like holding your wife's hand is good for your health, but if you do that just to be healthy, then it's perverse. Yeah, and taking time to do your prayers helps you to be healthier. But if you're just doing it just for your health, then that's perverse. So there's a paradox there. And Joseph Pieper talks about this in his work on leisure, about this paradox. Anyway, yeah. Any more thoughts about that? Yeah.
The rule of St. Benedict is a beautiful example of how we can balance out between our work and our prayer. And it's really interesting that the monastery of Vediminster, if you look at their horarium, they only have, quote, 25 hours a week of manual labor time. And the rest of their week is spent in the work of God with prayer. And when I am more attentive to my prayer rule with St. Benedict, then I am much more efficient with my work at the college. But if I swap it and I look at, oh, look how efficient I am at the college, then workaholism kicks in. And I forget my prayer rule, and then I become less efficient every time. So and Rule of St. Benedict is in our bookstore. So.
Oh yeah, it's a great work. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, well, so we've come to the end, but if you have any thoughts or stories or questions that you want to share, you can talk to me afterwards. But thank you all for your attention, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.